Research at Northern New South Wales Local Health District. And over the next 3 seminars, we're delighted to bring you a mini-series focused on research, which we know is a topic that is of interest to many of you and also our healthcare colleagues. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by 2 amazing people. So we've got Associate Professor Dianne Reidlinger and also Dr. Kate Odgers-Jewell, and they'll guide us through a session on a dive into qualitative research. Next slide, please, Kate. So to officially get us started, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters where we work and live. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of living culture, their connection to country, their contribution to the life of this region. We pay our respects to the ancestors and elders of the region and to all Aboriginal people, past, present and future, and any Aboriginal people that may be joining us today. So welcome. Next slide, please, Kate. Just a shout out to our generous sponsors. At the moment, we're being supported by the University Centre for Rural Health, and they're supporting with the delivery and also the operations of the CLaN. Thank you, Kate. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the CLaN, this is just a little bit of a recap. It's a large consolidated collaborative learning network comprising of a partnership of 10 New South Wales local health districts, also the New South Wales Health Education and Training Institute, and a number of organisations in Queensland, which together capture 8 hospital and health services, including the Tropical Australian Academic Health Science Centre and the Darling Downs in Health and Innovation Research Collaborative. The CLaN is a rural-led initiative that aims to provide high-quality research education and training to healthcare staff working in rural and regional areas. And our aim is to provide with you, our keen learners, education and training opportunities. Thank you, Kate, for going to the next slide. We have an CLaN YouTube channel, so if you've missed any of the seminars to date or want to revisit any of the content, past presentations, please do so by visiting our CLaN YouTube channel. Next slide, please, Kate. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Given the large audience, we encourage everyone to keep your microphones on mute, or we'll mute them for you. We're also recording the session for later viewing through the CLaN YouTube channel. Look, if you don't want to appear in the recording, just simply turn off your microphones, please. Next slide, please, Kate. While we're asking you to keep your microphones muted, please feel free to ask questions throughout the seminar using the chat function, and we'll endeavour to answer them. If there's time at the end of the presentation, we will open the floor and attempt to answer some live questions. This will be guided by my colleague, Dr. Zoe Micallef. Next slide, please, Kate. So as I mentioned right up front, this is the first of 3 sessions that comprises a mini-series on qualitative research. So today's first session is a dive into qualitative research. And if you're keen and want to hang around for the next 2 sessions, we've got one in July and also August, and they will cover qualitative methodologies, so selecting the right lens. And this will be by our colleague, Dr. David Schmidt, who is a Senior Program Manager, Rural Research at the Health Education and Training Institute in New South Wales. And then the August presentation will be on qualitative analysis, so analysis of qualitative data. And this will be by Dr. Olivia King, who's from the Western Alliance Academic Health Science Centre Regional Research Capacity Building Program. Next slide, please, Kate. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers. So we've got Associate Professor Dianne Reidlinger and also Dr. Kate Odgers-Jewell. Di is the head of program for the Master of Nutrition and Dietetics program at Bond University and is an accredited practicing dietitian, educator and researcher. Kate, who I know very well, is the conjoint allied health academic researcher with Bond University and Northern New South Wales Local Health District. Kate is also an accredited practicing dietitian, educator and researcher, is a mixed method researcher and really loves the storytelling aspect of qualitative research. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kate and Di, who will guide us through today's session. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Alex and Zoe, for inviting us to deliver the session today. We're both really excited to take a dive with you into qualitative research. So we're going to cover a few things in this session. The first is the similarities and differences between qualitative and quantitative research. We're going to chat about some of the key methods used in qualitative research, the common factors that are associated with quality and rigour in qualitative research, and we'll also talk about some critical appraisal tools for qualitative research. Before we dive in, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you all. So Zoe's going to kindly share a couple of quick polls, and we'll give you a bit of time just to respond to those. Once you've responded, you should start to see the results. Just give 10 more seconds on this one. Fantastic. So it seems like we've mostly got clinicians, around 35% of the group, 24% are researchers, and then about 15% clinician researchers, and 26% other, which will be interesting to hear what the others are. Thank you, Zoe. Could we move on to the second poll, please? Fantastic. So again, once you've responded, you'll be able to see others' responses. So we'll give that another 10 seconds. We've got quite a few responses there, which is fantastic. Alrighty, so our average is around 2.4, so people aren't feeling overly confident in judging the quality of qualitative research, and that's very understandable. We really hope that this session today helps you and that you feel a bit more confident by the end of the hour. Thank you, Zoe. So to start off, let's have a little chat about what qualitative research is. So qualitative research utilizes non-numeric data, so it attempts to uncover the deeper meanings of human experiences and behaviour. It enables us as researchers to understand the richness and complexity of human behaviour and allows us to explore, narrate and explain phenomena and make sense of the complex reality that we're living in.
That's great.
So qualitative research examines the how and why of decision making rather than the when, what and where. And there are various common types of qualitative research, such as narrative research, phenomenological research, grounded theory research, ethnographic research, historical research, and case study research. So in qualitative research, we collect data in the form of observations, texts, and pictures, not numbers. And we look to answer research questions that explore how and why individuals act in certain ways. Qualitative research is a great way to bring forward unrepresented voices, so people from non-mainstream cultures, patients to understand their experiences of health services, for example, and victims of crime.
So I'll attempt to bring us through. So I'll attempt to take us through a couple of key concepts, which I think sound a lot scarier than they are. And we originally developed this presentation without putting this slide in, but we feel that it's a nice way for you to understand why there is such a difference between quantitative research and qualitative research. I'll just put my hand up and say I am not an expert in ontology and epistemology, but I have had several years of engaging with it and reflecting on it, and hopefully I know enough to be able to guide you through just the basics of it. And I expect that in the second of this seminar series, David Schmidt should delve into this a little bit more. So firstly, ontology and epistemology are very sort of big, convoluted words, but they're very important to all research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. It doesn't really get talked about much in quantitative research, mainly because the scientific paradigm is the dominant paradigm, and therefore it's a little bit like cultures. We sort of assume that that's everybody's paradigm. And they could simply be captured as just reflecting and understanding what our approach, perspective, philosophy, or lens might be. And the two words I've defined on this slide, ontology is what we understand truth is, or what we understand reality to be. So if we use the scientific paradigm, the ontology is positivism and realism. And as we will all be familiar with, the scientific paradigm, we tend to be looking for the right answer. And that inherently means that we believe there's one single truth or reality that we're trying to uncover in our research. If I then move on to a more qualitative ontology, such as relativism or constructivism, the opposite is true. We believe that there are multiple truths that exist, and truth and reality depend on our own experience and the context that we're experiencing things in. So ontology is usually your top level, and from the ontology is where our epistemology comes from. And epistemology is just how we understand the nature of knowledge. So again, using the example of scientific, our understanding of knowledge is objectivity. So whether we exist or not, knowledge exists, and it's there for us to uncover it. So we're looking for the facts if we're using a scientific epistemology. To use an interpretivist epistemology, that's much more aligned with a qualitative approach. We're much more subjective, and we actually value the subjectivity. And we're looking at that co-construction of knowledge with our participants, where we as researchers are working to interpret their experiences in conjunction with our participants. So you can see how these concepts fundamentally underpin and guide the selection of research methodologies and methods, and they also affect the terminology used. And I say that because I went to, I think, around 3 qualitative courses before I realised that a lot of the things that were confusing me were the different terminology that was being used for the same thing, and that was related to the different paradigms and epistemologies that the researchers were coming from when I was attending those qualitative research courses. So it's important to know that you may read a term in one paper that seems like it's the same as something else you've read in another paper, but it's called something different. Sometimes that's just merely because they're using a different lens for their research. And I've got an example there. People often Alex, I keep getting muted.
I know that's very, very strange. I don't quite know why that's happening. Hopefully the bug's gone and you can continue now.
Okay. I just wanted to use the example of bias because people often say, isn't qualitative research biased? You wouldn't talk about bias for most forms of qualitative research because inherent in qualitative research is that co-construction and that epistemology of constructing the knowledge together. And what you do in qualitative research is you embrace your own position and your own reflexivity, and you make that transparent. And that is a key difference, I guess, with positivism or realism compared to a more qualitative approach. And so in interpretivism, all opinions and views are theoretically valid. So it's not biased for for a researcher to come to the research with their own experiences and their own interpretation of the research. I would just use, I often use, sorry, Kate, I just thought of another thing. I just often use the experience of COVID as a really nice example of the differences that come from these ontologies and epistemologies. So COVID is something that everybody experienced across the whole world. If we wanted to design a nice quantitative study, we would get a validated measure, for example, of quality of life, and we would administer that to people perhaps at multiple time points for a longitudinal study or perhaps cross-sectionally. And we would then be able to gauge how quality of life was affected by COVID. Taking a more qualitative approach, we would not be using a validated tool. We would be seeking to find all of the different experiences that we all had, despite the fact that we all experienced the same phenomenon. So we were all around for COVID, but some of us were locked down more than others. Some of us had children. Some of us had to do homeschooling as well as work. Others of us had borders closed right near where we work, which affected things in different ways. So the qualitative aspect coming from that co-construction of knowledge seeks to just capture those rich experiences rather than to define an experience by a number or a set validated measure. So this is a bit of a summary slide which comes from those concepts which I've introduced. And if we're looking at quantitative, it's values objectivity. We try, don't we, to have a randomised control trial where we control for anything that might bias the results. We're looking to reduce things to just what the impact of the thing we're interested in is, and trying to get rid of some of those confounders and to predict what might happen if we change one variable, its impact on another variable. It assumes that things are measurable. It assumes that by measuring things, we'll be able to establish causation or see what relationships are there. And very much we expect that 2 + 2 = 4, the parts equal the whole. You typically report your statistical analyses, and the researcher is very much seen as separate to the research and the analysis. And I would argue that it's actually we're not as separate when we do quantitative research as we pretend to be. We still have influence on the types of statistical analyses we might choose. We still also have input into the types of tools we choose. And sometimes people will choose one particular statistical test, for example, because it's more likely to show a relationship than perhaps another one might. So I guess quantitative, which we're all very much familiar with, and I'm just raising that question about the objectivity and whether it is actually as objective as we think it is. Qualitative, by comparison, we're looking at describing the meaning of an experience As I said, with my COVID example, what did that experience mean for that individual? How did they experience and what did it mean? And that subjectivity is actually prized, and it's much more about making the researcher's position and experience as transparent as possible, rather than trying to remove that the researcher's experience and position. It's about discovering and hypothesis generation often. It's interpretive, and often the whole is greater than the parts. It's about pulling together what we call rich or thick narrative from individuals who have really good insight into a particular phenomenon. It's been used a lot in uncovering experiences for people who are quite marginalised. For example, people who might be victims of sexual assault, for whom it's difficult to hear those voices. And as Kate said, it uses communication and observation as the key elements for collecting the data rather than instruments.
So there are various methods that we use in qualitative research. The most common ones that you've probably most regularly heard about are interviews and focus groups. Generally, we would do individual interviews or focus groups, usually in small groups, and they can be done as or facilitated as face-to-face, phone or video. And the video is becoming a bit more common since COVID. Doing things via Zoom and Teams can be really useful in terms of recording and automatically transcribing information. There are various degrees of structure within interviews or focus groups, so we could have something really structured with questions that we go through question by question. We could have something semi-structured where we've got interview guides or focus group guides and prompt questions, but we might not necessarily stick to those. Or we can have something that's just a conversation that doesn't really have much structure at all. When we're deciding what methods to use, we need to consider the different types of interviews, the benefits and challenges of these methods, and also how to design good questions that actually meet your research objective and aim and are not just random or closed-ended questions. The less common forms of qualitative or methods used in qualitative research are things like observation, and there's various levels of observation that can be used. Documents, so using things like reports, meeting minutes or emails. Self-reflection, journaling or autoethnography. And also things like photos or visual techniques, so photo elicitation or photo voice. When we're thinking about our clinical practice, one of the very useful tools that we can develop and continue to work on is critical appraisal. So in critical appraisal, we would come up with a clinical question or a research question, study question, and then try to find research that aligns really well to that. We would then appraise articles and look at how well the studies were done and also what the results mean. And if those are useful clinically for us and relevant to the particular context and patient. There are various steps that we utilise in critical appraisal. We would generally start off by selecting an appropriate critical appraisal tool. So there's a number of qualitative research critical appraisal tools that we will talk about today. We then read the paper using targeted reading. So we generally start off with our title and abstract, and then probably go to the methods will be the most relevant part. We would go through and respond to the questions and briefly note the rationale for our responses within that, and then discuss our answers with a peer and compare and agree on responses. You might guess that one of the best ways to do this is by attending journal clubs. So this is often what we'll do in a journal club, and it's a really nice way to critically appraise research together and then come up with decisions as to whether you can utilise the findings of those studies in your practice. What I will just flag is that these terms around believability and usefulness of research are very positivist, And if we were to use qualitative language, we would use terms like dependability, credibility, confirmability, transferability, and reflexivity.
So we are going to include a couple of activities in today's seminar. And what we've done is provide the first part of an abstract of a paper which was done, a study which was done on dietetics graduates' experiences of being prepared for the workforce. And by way of explanation, obviously, I'm a dietitian, and so that's why I've selected this paper. But we've been in a state of transition in dietetics over the last 10 years, moving away from more traditional roles for dietitians, and we're finding a lot more of our graduates are working in private practice rather than public health systems. And so there's very little research that has actually been done on the graduates' experiences. So we have just included the first part of the abstract here, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to identify the aim of the study and the method that was used for data collection, as well as how the data was analysed. So hopefully you've had a bit of time to read through that. Kate, do you think we need a little bit longer or move on?
No, I think that we can just see if anyone wants to pop any responses in the chat. Would be wonderful. So in terms of the aims of the study, the method used, and the data analysis. Fantastic. So Cindy's popped something in the chat.
So explore a national sample of dietetic graduates' experiences of and challenges faced. Excellent. Semi-structured interviews were used for data collection. So semi-structured interviews reflect the differing levels of structure that can happen with interviews. We could have a totally structured interview where every single person received the same questions, worded exactly the same way and in the same order, or we could have a very unstructured process where there wasn't, there was just a loose list of questions and we went through those in whatever order it seemed was natural. Yes, and the multi-analyst approach employing thematic and template analysis. So multi-analyst simply refers to the fact that there was more than one person doing the analysis, and both thematic and template analysis was done. The template analysis was actually because this was the third of a series of studies where we actually interviewed academic educators, clinical educators, and then dietetics graduates. So we started with the themes that came from the educators from the two prior studies, and then worked on developing the 5 themes beginning with the existing themes. And we ended up with quite different themes to what the educators came up with, which I think proves that it's a good approach to have explored this group. This is me as well. So the quality of qualitative research, just as with quantitative research, we do have a number of critical appraisal tools that are available. A lot of purists would say that simply having a checklist of things to look through to determine the quality of research is not the qualitative way. So there are purists who say that, you know, using a checklist is not the right approach for qualitative. However, what we were finding is in the peer-reviewed literature, most of the peer reviewers are quantitative researchers, and they needed some guidance around how to assess the quality of qualitative research. I think it's fair to say in health research, we're a lot more pragmatic. We appreciate a checklist. Most of us have been educated in more of a scientific paradigm. And so particularly those that are new to qualitative research, these checklists are excellent first start with it. So we are going to go through some key concepts, as I said, as we go through this presentation, and pretend it's not so complicated.
Thank you. So in terms of looking at whether qualitative research is trustworthy, there's 4 kind of key trustworthiness components that we would look at. And these are credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. I found this recent paper that talks about various strategies for researchers and thought it would be useful to just go through this really quickly with you. So in terms of credibility, some of the things that we want to do as researchers is spend time in the field, build rapport with participants, and really try to deeply understand their perspectives. So this is quite different to quantitative research, where we might send out a survey or give a tool to someone to complete, and we wouldn't actually be immersed in that process or get to understand the context as much. We utilise a lot of reflexivity in qualitative research, so we need to acknowledge our personal biases and our preconceptions when we are researchers in this space. We utilise triangulation, so employ multiple sources of data and also methods. In terms of transferability, we look for thick descriptions. So we want to provide detailed contextual information so that readers can assess the transferability of findings and actually understand, is this relevant to my patient population and my group? In terms of the sampling strategies, we also want to explain those really well so that readers can also understand that transferability and, you know, did we utilize sampling strategies that could have captured the right people as participants. With dependability, it's really important to document our methods and our procedures and any decisions that we make and keep an audit trail of our research decisions, changes, and data analysis processes. I think that we often enter into research thinking, I'll remember all the decisions I make, and then 3 months later, or even less, you think, oh, why did I do that? I can't remember. So really important to document these things. And then finally, in terms of confirmability, it's really beneficial to engage with colleagues or experts to review findings, interpretations, and also try to minimise that researcher bias. We utilise member checking. So this enables participants to actually have a look at what the findings are that we've come up with to make sure that we're all on the same page. Sometimes participants might engage in an interview or a focus group and then afterwards think, actually, I wish I'd said this, or I don't think I explained this clearly enough, or I didn't get this across. This enables them checking transcripts and also checking the findings can enable them to add to that process. And then finally, reflexive journaling. So maintaining a reflexive journal as a researcher of our personal thoughts, potential biases, and also our reflections throughout the study can be really beneficial too. So we're going to move into a second activity, and this is the last activity that we've broken down into steps. You may have realised that what we're getting you to do is to go through some of the questions in the critical appraisal tools. So these questions are from the qualitative research critical appraisal tool from the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. And we thought that would be a gentle entry point to critical appraisal. So I'd love to ask you to just have a read through this part of the methods section and then have a think about this question around the sampling strategy, and then we can ask you to pop some things in the chat. Fantastic. So we've got some answers coming through there in the chat around the purposive and maximum variation sampling. So that's a technique that aims to capture a wide range of perspectives, looking at the thing that you're trying to study. So it wasn't limited to certain parts of the country or certain programs or anything like that. Fantastic. I'll move on to the next slide. And just get you to spend a couple of minutes reading through the study design and researcher position. And then our question here is the researcher position described? Alrighty, so in terms of the research position, you'll see in this final section here, the research team consisted of 4 females. All were health professional educators in higher education institutions working in the discipline of dietetics or health sciences. And then it talks a little bit about the researcher's experience as well. Di, did you want to add anything, having been an author on this?
I guess I have been kind of trying to answer some of the questions in the chat. I guess one of the things that I wanted to reflect is that paragraph there, which has the researcher's position. When I did a qualitative study for my thesis, I had both of my supervisors were quantitative researchers, and I actually had written in the margin of my drafts by my primary supervisor, this does not belong in a thesis. So I think this idea about declaring your position like this is very strange for somebody who may have only ever had experience with more quantitative research. But you can see that this is how we are transparent and declaring our experiences rather than trying to pretend that the results are free from bias.
Thank you. I'll move on to the last one. Alrighty, so our final bit of this activity is to have a quick look through the data analysis. So again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to read through that and have a think about how the data were analysed and how the analysis were checked. Alrighty, Di, are you happy to talk us through this?
It's a very detailed account of the data analysis and probably more detailed than people are most used to seeing in qualitative research, but we have used, we've reported in the data analysis methods here everything that we did. So Margaret had asked me a question in the chat earlier about whether we used any particular software, and you can see that we did initially use NVivo, which is an Australian software it doesn't do the analysis for you, but it helps you to organise your data when you're doing qualitative analysis and to sort of organise your codes. I'm a very tactile person when it comes to analysis, so we did a lot of the actual analysis physically using little bits of paper, blue tack, and pinning it up on walls and moving things around. And you will see within the results here, within the analysis here, we have in that second paragraph, Kate, you might just want to highlight to acknowledge the likely influence of findings from the previous similar studies that the research team had been involved with. Template analysis was incorporated. So that was it was a way for us to acknowledge that we couldn't come at this data from graduates without also having in the backs of our minds the analysis we'd done when we had interviewed educators, academic and clinical educators. So we wanted to be clear that we were influenced by those previous studies, but that we then went on to do further analysis and how we did that. You'll note down at the bottom where it says participant checking of transcripts or themes was not carried out, nor were there any repeat interviews conducted with participants. You will see some reporting checklists which recommend member checking or sending things back to participants to make sure that they agree that the interpretation is as they would have represented it. And so that's seen by some to be an indicator of quality. And we didn't do it for this study, so we wanted to be clear that we hadn't done that. And that's part of that confirmability that Kate spoke about earlier when you're assessing the rigour of a particular study.
Thank you so much, Di. So as mentioned, we've popped some links to some relevant qualitative critical appraisal checklists and tools. The one that we've kind of focused on today with our questions is the one from the University of Oxford and the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. I find this one quite useful and easy to use. There's some great prompts provided, and you'll see that you kind of select which answer you think is most correct and then pop comments beneath each one. The CASP tool is also really useful, and there's a Joanna Briggs Institute checklist as well that can be used. So thank you for sharing that. Let me move to the next slide. So in terms of our summary and next steps, so what we've done today in this short period of time is to chat about the similarities and differences between qualitative and quantitative research. And we hope that you've found that useful and interesting. Qualitative research, usually in evidence-based practice, is not often spoken about because we're very focused on our systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials and our quantitative research phenomenons. However, it's so beneficial and can be so useful for our clinical care, especially when we're trying to understand patient experiences and things that are happening in people's lives. So I hope that understanding the methods used in qualitative research and also looking at those markers of quality and rigour in qualitative research in this session will help you to unpack qualitative research and utilise those critical appraisal tools to enable you to look at good quality research that you can utilise in your practice. I think this one's for you.
Thanks, Kate. And I think you did my last slide because I got mixed up. So thank you for that. Before we finish up, I just wanted to plant a collaboration seed, given we have so many people online, and just wanting to sort of highlight, most of you will know that we require research projects for our health professional students, and at Bond we have nutrition, OT, physio and medical programs which all have dedicated research subjects, and we really love to partner with clinicians for that. So if you're new to qualitative research, or you have or you're an experienced researcher and you have existing research projects that you'd like to progress, I just wanted to ask you to please consider partnering with us to provide those student research opportunities. As a case study, our student dietitians, so it will be different for different disciplines, but here at Bond, our student dietitians all do a systematic review. And over the last 3 years, the majority of those get published. And the students themselves will submit it for publication soon after completion. So it's a really nice way if you want to get an overview of the research that's already been done. A systematic review is a great sort of opt-in if you've got a good clinical question. They also analyse a small data set and write that data up as a manuscript. And we acknowledge that these original data sets that are analysed are generally not publishable, but what we find is it does kind of assist you as a researcher in progressing your data analysis, because you might, for example, try data analysis one way with the subsample with the student and then roll that out with your larger data set later on. We also get our students to do additional activities like developing research protocols and drafting up either health service or university ethics applications for new research projects, and not ones that they will collect the data on or analyse the data on. It's simply giving them that experience at going through the process of applying for ethics as far as they can in the time that they have available. And we've found Kate has had experience last semester in supporting that was partly done by the students or one of the diabetes teams that she works with. They can also do things like participant recruitment, data collection, data cleaning, etc. And all of these projects, the beauty of them is that we always allocate a Bond academic as a supervisor because we know our clinicians are busy, and we just agree with our clinicians how much they want to be involved, how confident they feel, and what they can dedicate in terms of usually just meeting via Zoom or Teams with the student and the Bond supervisor. And if manuscripts are developed, then we would, of course, you'd have input into that as well. So I just did want to flag that, and we've got both mine and Kate's email address at the bottom there, and please do get in touch if you're interested to hear more about that.
Thank you so much, Di. I'm sorry, I forgot on the last slide just to ask if you could respond to the poll question around your confidence in judging the quality of qualitative research. And then we've got a few more slides to go through to get us to 4 o'clock. We will finish soon.
So just while you're completing that last poll, I might just do a brief promo, if you don't mind flicking to the next slide, Kate. So as Alex has already mentioned, we've got a great 3-seminar series of qualitative research coming your way. We've done the first one. The next seminar is being presented by Dr. David Schmidt, who is our Senior Program Manager for the Health Education Training Institute, and he'll be presenting on qualitative methodologies, selecting the right lens. And in this session, David's going to cover the difference between methodologies and methods, the features of common qualitative methodologies, finding the balance between description and interpretation, selecting a methodology, Indigenous and Western approaches, how methodology affects your methods, reflexivity and rigour. So please, if you are interested, take the QR code. Otherwise, I will pop the link to register in the chat and you will receive notification about it after this seminar. So we hope to see many of you back. And lastly, we're always taking a critical eye to everything that we do for CLaN. We're always trying to be better and to better suit your needs. So please take a minute to also complete the evaluation form, and it's going to help us to determine what we do in the future and how we can make sure that we're meeting your research needs. Thank you so much, Kate and Di. That was an absolutely fabulous session. I learnt so much and it did debunk some of the qual mysteries to me. There were a few questions. If anyone has any questions they'd like to come off mute, please feel free. But there was a great question in the chat that I'm going to pose to you now. Are the journals that are kept by researchers only for their benefit, or how are they used during the analysis phase? And if you're being assisted in analyses, does this mean that team also accesses your journals?
Hey, do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please.
The journals are really good for just recording your thoughts as you perhaps are interviewing somebody, and it performs a few different things. Firstly, if you notice a change in body language or a level of discomfort that you perhaps don't pick up just on a transcript, that's where I would usually record something like that. But also just how the sort of underpinning things that are coming through that, again, might relate to earlier interviews that you've done or ideas that you yourself have. And yes, you would look at those journals, particularly at the beginning of your analysis. And if you are doing analysis with other researchers involved, so a more constructive co-construction of those themes with other researchers, then you would usually share that with the rest of the team. We also often will do a reflexivity exercise at the beginning of the project, just to sort of draw out our investment in the project and what preconceived ideas we might have, just to make it a little bit easier when we're looking at people's reflexive journals to see, whether they're getting new ideas or if it's confirming their existing ideas. I hope that answers it.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Still, after all this time. Another question from the chat. What are the pros and cons of member checking?
Yeah, so I actually answered that one that was posed. It's a really good question. And member checking, I think the pros of member checking, if it's done well, is that you're able to actually confirm that what you've generated in terms of themes is actually reflecting what the people that are your participants believe and have experienced. And so what I put in the chat was, I used to think it wasn't that good because people often will just send the transcript back to somebody and it's just a transcript of their interview audio files. And to me, that's less, it's putting a burden on participants with really not much kind of value add, because you can actually verify the transcript with the recording. What you really want to know is whether your themes, so your interpretation and analysis across all of the interviews, is resonating with your participants. And that's where I think member checking is really important, and a real pro of it is that they then have the opportunity to come back and say, actually, you haven't captured a really big thing for me, which is XYZ, and you can then rework your themes, relook at the data across all of the interviews to see what comes out of that. And importantly, you should be mentioning any divergent views that might come through in your analysis. So if the majority of people are positive about something, but you have one person who's not, then you would be ensuring that that's written up in your results as well to represent everyone's views.
Fantastic. Thanks, Di. We might start to wrap it up. I do appreciate there's a few comments and questions that we didn't get to, but if you do have any further questions, Di and Kate have kindly provided their email addresses, so please reach out. They've also provided you with an opportunity to collaborate with Bond researchers, which is amazing, so please do reach out if you're interested. It's great to see from a quantitative perspective that people's understanding of how to appraise a qualitative article went up, but importantly from a qualitative perspective, there's lots of messages saying that it was a fantastic session and that people really enjoyed it. So please join me in thanking Kate and Di for today's seminar, and we look forward to seeing you in July for the next qualitative seminar on research methods. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Zoe and Alex. Thanks, everyone.